The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. The following video is presented by the Center for Educational Media in partnership with Professional Educators of Tennessee's Leader U Conference. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
I'm Amy. Nice to see all of you here in the afternoon. We're talking about persistence, which you may need this afternoon after you've had lunch and a full day of learning. And sometimes that you're introduced in these things and sometimes you aren't, and sometimes I forget to do it, so I have a slide here to remind myself to tell you kind of my background. I have been an educator for a while now, probably close to 23, 24 years. It is my passion, and I've done different things. I've been a teacher. I actually started off in the Department of Defense schools as an instructional aide while I was getting my degree in Germany, and then moved on to classroom teaching, and then as an administrator, worked as an administrator. I've worked from preschool all the way up to around grade 9. One of the experiences that I think fits today's talk is I think where my persistence was tested the most was in a particular school here in Nashville. We had moved back from Germany. I had spent 2 years in a resource room. I'm a special educator. So I spent 2 years and we moved to Nashville and I was looking for a job, and one came across because I've always been interested in kids who have behavior issues, learning issues and behavior issues. And like, okay, I'm gonna go interview for this position. And I don't know if you're from the area, D.D. Wallace or Wallace Academy, if anyone's familiar with that. I wasn't at the time. So this is a school in which children are zero tolerance out of their home school in Metro, and they are put, because they have an IEP, they are put in, or they were in Wallace Academy, which was a self-contained school for students with behavior issues. So they had done something so dramatically bad that they would have been kicked out of their school, but they still required services, so they came to us. Or the MIP room could not handle that student. Merle, we often got a lot of kids from Merle. So I walked in, and when you're in an interview and you're hoping for the ADHD classroom instead of the ODD, the oppositional defiant classroom, maybe you should reconsider the job you're about to take. So I started off, and these were oppositionally defiant 12 to 15-year-olds. And I do tell audiences when I start that I am certified, or I was. I don't know how long that certification actually lasts, but I am trained to take you to the floor and put you in a seclusion room if necessary. So if anyone gets out of control, I've got it today. So I worked with kids. Usually I had about 12 in the classroom, usually boys. Girls were typically worse, actually, and there were usually 2 out of the 12 to 15 kids in the classroom. At first, I was on the floor 6 times a day because someone was in that kind of danger. I learned to keep scissors were kept locked in my desk. I learned to position my desk in a way that would be safe. So these are kids that had serious issues. So thinking about their learning beyond these issues was a challenge for me. And every morning I would get up and say, can I do this? Is this possible? So my own ability to work through persistence and keep going was challenged during this time. And certainly these kids were. So I definitely tried to motivate them. And I think I succeeded in some ways. Now knowing what I know, I wish I could go back. But in particular, I really became interested. Most of the kids also had reading problems. Okay, because they had schooling, either they had a learning disability or they had such disruption from their school day that they really had not learned to read well. And I had the phonics down. That's really important to get those lower level skills. I could teach that. But when it came to comprehension, I really didn't know what I was doing. And it was interesting to me because I often give interest inventories to kids. Of course, with these kids, I don't ask what kind of books do you like to read. I ask what kind of movies and TV shows do you like to watch. Now remember, these are oppositional defiant, 12, around 12, average age 12 years old. I had some 15-year-olds. And they would tell me things like, I like, and this is going to date me, the Rugrats. Do you guys remember what the Rugrats were? Okay. I like to watch the Rugrats. Really? That's really interesting to me because you're like in and out of juvie, but you like to watch a cartoon for okay. And that was a lot of the kids would give me those answers. And then I would ask them when they come in from watching a movie, well, what movie did you see? Oh, it was this movie and it had this great car chase and there was this stuff that blew up and it was the best movie ever. Of course, it was always something that was inappropriate and they should not be watching at their age. But listening to them, I'm like, okay, so who was the main character? I don't know. Well, what was the main character trying to do? I don't know. And they really couldn't even see why that was really important to their experience of watching a movie. And then it dawned on me that it wasn't just reading comprehension that they had difficulty with, it was narrative. So of course they like to watch simple narratives like Rugrats because that made sense to them. So then I was like, wow, and I really didn't know what to do. So we'd read a passage, and a lot of times I'd read it aloud to them because we had such different abilities in the classroom. So I'd read it aloud, and then I'd start asking questions because that's what we do in comprehension instruction, right? Now I know better. So I asked the questions, and they couldn't get the answer, and I'd have to tell them the answer, and I'd be like, just go back and read it. I don't understand where you're having difficulties. So I went back to school and tried to figure that out. So I did my master's degree at Vanderbilt working with kids with behavior disorders and then specializing in reading. And then I stayed as a research coordinator there and moved on to a PhD in reading. So now I have some sense what I should have done back then. And I think, I think I helped the kids, but what I really know now. So that's why I'm here and why I talk to groups, because I have this passion for helping those kids that are unmotivated and who struggle with reading. So given that background, we have a lot of current challenges in literacy. 31% of fourth grade students and 24% of eighth grade students score below a basic level of reading comprehension. And only 50% of students who take the ACT are actually ready for college classroom learning. So why is that? So today you're going to get a mix of both reading and engagement and persistence. So I'll give you that caveat to begin with, that disclaimer, because for me it's all interwoven together, and reading is such a basic piece of schooling. But why is it? It's complex. So you have all of these language comprehension pieces that I was trying to work on with thesis, but you also have all the word recognition stuff, right? And all of that has to come together, and it's got to be increasingly strategic to actually create this rope at the end that you see. Each piece, one of these strands is missing, and a kid's going to struggle with reading. And it has to become strategic and automatic as they go. So why do students struggle with comprehension? What are some of the reasons you think that they struggle? Definitely a lack of vocabulary. That's one of my interest areas. Lack of exposures. Absolutely. Okay, some visualization. Background knowledge, story structure, great. Anything else? Yes, definitions. Fluency. Okay, that increasingly automatic piece is important because if you're not fluent and you don't have those decoding skills, if that isn't automatic, you don't have room to do the higher order comprehension. Okay, so things that have been shown that are really important: decoding and sight word recognition, language like syntax, morphology, and semantics, reasoning like inference and analogical skills, executive function. This is a big one in comprehension. Your metacognition, or thinking about your own thinking, your ability to self-regulate when things are going wrong and you have to fix that and you have to come up with a strategy, very important. And you imagine the kids that I was working with, a lot of difficulty in that area. Working memory and attention, all important. Vocabulary, knowledge, and motivation. Print exposure as well. So I like to think about it this way. The RAND group came up with a good model, I think, of comprehension when we think about laying instruction on the concept of comprehension. It's really this interaction between the reader, the text, and what you're asking them to do. So we can have issues in reading comprehension because of what we just talked about, lower levels of reading ability due to any of the reasons we just saw, lack of motivation, or low reading volume. We can also have issues with the text. So we know with Common Core we've had an increase for text complexity, right? Over time, give them more challenging text without necessarily giving them more strategies to deal with that text. But texts are often not complex enough to foster growth, like Common Core says, or on the flip side, they are mismatched to the learner. The kids that I was working with can't handle that. You know, we just increased the level of the text complexity. Oh, they're going to get magically better. No, not the kids that I'm working with. So that's problematic. And we're going to talk about that today. And then also instruction often, and this is what I was doing with those kids, consists of testing, not teaching comprehension. So it means that we're reading a story together and we're answering questions. That is testing. That is not explaining to the child how to be a better comprehender, okay? So, and I was doing it. No wonder they weren't really getting better in comprehension, because I wasn't teaching them to think differently when they're working through text, or when they answer questions and get it wrong, what was the right question and why. So, how many people are familiar with John Hattie's work? A couple people, great. So John Hattie, which is impressive, I do meta-analyses, so I compile all the studies that have been done in an area, which usually takes right now I'm working on one that's taken 7 years, and we have finally accomplished this task, and now I have to analyze it. They take a long time, and so you compile all of these studies over the last, in this case, the last one we've done was 1935 to now, and we take all the studies that have ever been done, and we compute what we call an effect size, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what John Hattie does is he takes all of the meta-analyses that have been conducted, and he squashes all those together in a mega meta-analysis. So what I'd like you to do is just take a couple of minutes with your partner or group and go through each of these and tell me, what kind of impact do you think this strategy or method would have on kids' academic outcomes? So, for instance, for comprehension programs, do you think you get a high impact if you have a specific comprehension program you're using, a medium impact, or a low impact? Okay? And if you'll just go through each one of these and kind of just know whether it is high, medium, or low, that would be great. And then we'll talk about the actual data on these methods. So about 2 minutes. First, I got to tell you something about effect sizes so you can interpret what you see next. An effect size is really the difference we have between a treatment and a control group. Okay, it's a measure of how the extent to which it worked. So if you give a small effect, and I use this, to explain kind of a small effect, 0.2 to a 0.3, I'm dancing in my office because that's publishable. I'm happy about that. That means I can make some change for kids. It's not a great change, but it's some change. It's important. Now, if I get a moderate effect size of 0.5, I'm dancing in the street because people need to know about this. This is like really important. This is a half a standard deviation above what other people did. I made a real difference for kids here. But if I get a 0.8, I'm dancing on the moon, because this is something you don't see very much in education. And I will say, if you ever see a 0.8 or above, you should always go back and look at the data to make sure that it was not cooked. Because that's one thing I talk to my doctoral students about. Like, you need to go back because it's very rare to get over a 0.8. You got to make sure that the methodology and what they were doing was sound. So here are the answers. Go through those and see which ones make sense and which ones are surprising. Okay, so what is surprising here? And it is, it's still a medium, like these medium effects are good, but yes. Oh, and I don't think this is. That's huge. Remember I told you we need to look at that? I actually have a student pulling all the studies that are underneath this, because we want to know exactly what's going on there, and she's pulled some of those and we've reviewed some of those. We're still working on that because it's going to take time. But this is huge, right? Like all these other things that we do, If we can add this piece, if we can figure out how to do this, seems like it will be very important. What else did you find interesting?
Sorry, but I'm looking for one that our principals talked to us about. I forget exactly how he refers to it. Student data tracking or tracking their own results on tests. Where's that? Is that anywhere?
That's a good question. I don't know if Hattie has reviewed that or not, because this is just a subsample of what he's reviewed. So I could, if you email me that question, we can look that up for you. It is very effective, actually, and it's part of what a lot of times in the self-regulation literature, they use that. So if you work with CBM, for instance, and you have to have kids, having them track their own data has always added a bump to their results. I wonder, and that's why when we pull these studies, I am curious if those will fall under there. But actually, it is effective. The question is how you do it, I think, is really important, and how authentic you make it. And it's not just about increasing the number, but actually capturing true learning for the kid. So there's a difference there, and we'll talk about that as we come up on how do we set goals and what kind of goals do we set. But great question. Any other things that you guys found surprising?
The matching teaching the student.
I was waiting for someone to say this. So how many PDs have we had, or at least I had? I don't know, are they still doing PDs on this? Because I know my two kids both have been tested on this like 3 times in school. And they're both in school still, one is still in school. So this has been shown in psychology not to be effective at all. 0.19, okay, we close to being effective, but no, almost all studies show that it is not effective. Yet in every educational psychology text, you have pages written about it. You have PDs all over the place about it. Now, do we have learning styles that remain consistent? We do. So if you're a visual learner, a kinesthetic learner, you will tend to, an auditory learner, you'll tend to be that over a lifetime. What doesn't seem to work is matching your instruction to your strength. Probably because we need to learn in all those modalities, okay? That's what my guess is that it's better to learn in all of those than to just go to someone's strength. It doesn't help. And there are some types of learning that can't be done in another way than with visual aids or auditorily. So I think that's probably why it doesn't work. But all the PD we've been given does not show up in the psychological literature that this works. So I always like to bring that one up because people are like, oh my goodness, I've spent all this time and they make me do, all these kids have to do these tests. It's not really going to help you much to know if they're an auditory learner. Anything else?
Student control over learning.
I always find that one really interesting because we're told to have what? Student-centered instruction, right? And I'm not against that. And for motivation purposes, I think you need to add that in. But it should not be your sole place that you go. Now, there is some literature, and you have to remember, John Hattie has taken meta-analyses, which have merged all of this information. When you actually look at gifted kids versus struggling kids, gifted kids actually do better with student-centered learning. So there are subsamples of kids. If the kids are higher, they actually do better. And even in first grade, Carol Connor's work looks at kids who come in with high language skills and high reading skills. They actually do better in student-centered work than in teacher-centered. But kids of average or lower than average have been shown to do better in teacher-directed instruction. So it probably depends a lot on the kid in that case. But I think that's an interesting one as well. So those student expectations, when you start looking at the literature, you go, oh, yeah, actually this makes some sense. For instance, in first year, they took first year college, college students, they give them 1 session of watching videos of upperclassmen discussing how they turned around their poor grades as freshmen. Because we have a lot of issues with college retention in a lot of colleges in the US. Part of the reason is we don't develop kids well enough to be they're not ready for that instruction as freshmen. But when they did this, you see, and remember, this is 1 session. You had higher scores on the GRE overall, but you had a 0.27 grade point average higher for the treatment group, and they were 80% less likely to drop out of school. 1 session. We also had 7th grade students who They had 8 sessions of study skills where they learned about how the brain was malleable, how they could change it. If you engage in difficult tasks, your brain becomes stronger. And they had 0.3 grade points higher. 9th grade students in science wrote a brief essay every 3 to 4 weeks, just one essay every 3 to 4 weeks in one semester. And they really had to discuss how what they were learning applied to their lives. Okay, so what they expected that this did to their lives, and I think that's why this falls under student expectations. But at the end of the semester, those kids had 0.8 grade points higher. So, yes.
Thank you, off topic, but is there any way you can send us this PowerPoint?
Absolutely. So, and at the end, you'll have my email, and I often send those out, so that's not a problem. There will also be links in here that we won't have time to go through, but I think are really good resources for you. Okay, so we've also seen in literacy in particular that students with greater self-efficacy, their belief that they are in control of their own learning, have better reading achievement. Engaged students have higher reading achievement than others. It's kind of like, yeah, duh. The amount of reading time predicts reading achievement and knowledge. But unfortunately, motivation declines as children get older. We all know that, right? If you've worked with adolescents. And there are many competing activities for children's attention today. So, another reason, and I think this is what gets at the heart of why why kids don't want to engage in text, why most of us probably don't want to engage in difficult text that we know nothing about the topic, right? Because that's what kids have to come into school. They know very little about a topic, and they have to engage deeply with this, is because it's hard. Okay, if we all had to sit down, I don't know, maybe some of you guys are computer nerds, but if we had to look at a programming manual right now, and I wanted you to read that, you'd be like, well, I know some of you might like that. Myself, I'm like, oh, it would be a struggle to get through that. But we expect kids to do that on a daily basis. And I really think this comes back to these particular books. Daniel Willingham is one of those cognitive psychologists that I follow, and really has a great book, Why Do Kids Not Like School? Okay, why don't they like to learn? And then there's another book that I really think is important for educators to read, and that's Peak, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise by Anders Ericsson. So Anders Ericsson has studied expertise his whole life. So he first studied how memory works and how people become these memory, they have these memory challenges, they're like memory athletes, and how you increase memory, because we should only be able to hold about 6 bits of information in our head at a time. These people are able to hold hundreds of bits of information. How do they do that? And that's what he was studying at first, but then he moved to things like violinists. Why do we have the best, how do you become the best violinist in the world? How do you become the best ballerina? How do you become the best chess player? And what he found in his research over the years is that it is not how smart you are. So actually the best chess players, I had assumed that they were the smartest people, around. Not necessarily true. When you look at the group, now they're all pretty smart. They probably have over 120 IQ because people don't go into chess and do it really as this is really their lives. They don't do that unless they're good at it. And I think, smart people are going to get into that. But when they look at what differentiates, is it IQ that differentiates your ability to play chess? It is not. It is how many hours you study and have practiced playing chess that makes the difference. So a lot of the people in the study were actually not as smart IQ-wise than people, but they did show that it was the amount of time they had taken studying game boards and which is pretty amazing, because isn't that what we want as educators? That is not your raw material going in, it really is what you do. So to me, those are exciting findings. And it's across the board. It's in every sport, it's in every human activity, is that it is the amount of time you put in and the kind of practice you get, which for educators, to me, that's exciting. Now, practice is this determining factor. So how much time you put in, but that effortful learning requires sustained effort. That's what makes it difficult. Learning requires energy and time. Okay? To make real gains, learning has to be frustrating to some extent. okay? Like if you're gonna make a gain, when you go into practice, for basketball, for instance, it's gotta be difficult to push you to that next level. And after the initial learning, getting better requires even more practice, which is usually not fun for the majority of us. And it's really what he found was it was deliberate practice, not just practice. For instance, if you're driving, okay, been driving a long time. I've been driving a number of years, and I think I'm okay at it, right? And this has also been shown with teaching, by the way, after 5 years. So you get good at it, and you kind of just stay at this level because it's good enough, right? Well, I was in Denver giving a talk, and I got a rental car, and it had one, where it tells you when you're out of lane, and it's giving me all this feedback, and I'm like, I really can't drive. I had no idea. I'm out of lane most of the time. It kept telling me I was tired. I'm not tired. I'm like, oh. So without that feedback, and I haven't gotten in any accidents, it's been okay, right? But I didn't, even though I've had lots of practice at driving, I wasn't getting any better at it because I didn't have feedback and I wasn't actively trying to get better. The same thing has been shown with teachers. At about year 5, you kind of level off. And you stay where you are, unless you're actively engaged in trying to improve your practice, which is a really interesting finding because you aren't even aware. You're like, I do this every day. Of course I'm good. I've gotten lots of practice. It's not just practice, but the feedback you receive and then internalizing that feedback and setting goals for the next session. That's really important. So you have to be purposeful. And the problem is that, and even when I talk to my daughter, she plays volleyball, and we talk about practice shouldn't feel good. If you feel good after practice, you've probably done what you typically would do, but you weren't pushed to actually get better. And that kind of sucks, right? Like, who's going to keep going in every day and like, oh, I just feel awful. I'm not, but that's what makes you better. So if that's the case, if you have to continually set goals, evaluate progress, and constantly be getting better, like, who's going to do that? And to do that, you've got to work on, and I'm going to skip that, you've got to work on these other skills. You've got to work on what persistence is, why it's important. You've got to be self-regulated, right? So it's a challenge. But if we're going to ask kids to get better at something and engage in these challenging tasks, we have to give them the ability to do so. And I wanted to quickly just say that in reading comprehension is really difficult. So we have 3 parts of reading comprehension, the process. We have the surface code, the decoding piece. You just take the words off the page. You've got this text base, which is the literal meaning of what the author's trying to say. But really, the true meaning is underneath that, okay? And that requires your background knowledge. You have to integrate what you know about what the author's trying to tell you in the background of what they're saying. This is where inference making comes in, where getting to the real meaning of the text comes in. But guess what? That requires a lot of cognitive effort. So this is difficult. So again, one of the reasons why kids don't engage, at least the kids I worked with, they thought that reading was just getting through the passage as quickly as possible, right? Like, I'm finished, I'm done. But that's not what reading is. Reading is actively engaging, mentally engaging with the author in a conversation. And that makes it really difficult to teach. So given that, there have been people that have been working on this for years. I actually became interested before, obviously, going into my doctoral program. But I was told that these things were too hard to measure and I should stay away from it. So I moved on and I went into inferencing and vocabulary and all these other things. But I'm still drawn to it because knowing people, and now looking at that effect size of 1.44, I'm like, I think I'm feeling pretty okay going into this realm. And so research-wise, we are adding mindset, what we call mindset training, that I'm going to talk about in a minute, to most of our interventions now. Because if I'm going to ask you to do something really difficult, I also need to give you all of the skills so that you can get through that difficult work and feel good about it. So people that have been working in this area, if you're looking for information, self-concept, self-determination, perseverance and self-efficacy, self-regulation, mindset, and interest are all kinds of sub-concepts within this area. And I like to, right now we're working on vignettes, like of Michael Jordan. You know, he didn't make his high school team and how he worked harder to do so. There are a number of cases where you see this in sports and academics, that people just, you know, work harder. They don't get something and they work harder. And you'll see a lot of people that are very successful really have this kind of growth mindset that we're going to talk about. So Carol Dweck, this is another book that I highly recommend for educators or parents when I speak. I think this is something that we all should know about. Really looked at, over the years, 2 types of mindset, that you could place people in 2 types. One is a fixed mindset and one is a growth mindset. And out of fixed mindset, really people believe that intelligence is static, that you're just given what you're given and you're going to be good at it or you're not. You know, the coach gets an athlete, they take day and they're like, oh, this kid's really athletic, this is going to be the kid that I go with. However, from what we see in Anders Ericsson work, it's not just raw talent. It also is how much work and effort you're willing to put in. So they believe that intelligence is static, which we know now that is not true, actually. There is a range that you can actually is malleable in all students. So we know that we can actually improve your intelligence over time given the right environment. So also, people who have a fixed mindset, they really think that it's important to look smart. They've been told they're smart, and they need to protect that. So they avoid challenges. They give up easily when there is an obstacle. They see effort as fruitless because if you're just good or bad, effort shouldn't matter, right? They ignore useful feedback because that's just a criticism of me. And they're threatened by other success, because that means, you know, I'm not as good and I have no control to change that, right? If I have a fixed mindset, I really believe you're good or you're not, and I don't have any control there. However, in a growth mindset, people believe that intelligence can be developed. It leads to the desire to learn more and learn from your mistakes. So they love challenges and mistakes because that means I have an opportunity to learn what went wrong and get better. Okay, I think this is somewhat rare in a lot of cases when it comes to academics, right? Kids are like, oh, I figured out, what did I do wrong? Why did it? Okay, I get it now. They persist despite obstacles. They see effort as a path to mastery. So they don't care if they're making mistakes because that means I'm going to get better at this. You know, cool, I'll figure out what's going on so I get better. They learn from criticism. They have no problem, hey, tell me what I'm doing, and they actively seek that. Tell me what I'm doing wrong exactly so I can figure this out. And they're inspired by other success because they believe if they work hard enough, they can get there too. So these are 2 types of people. I will say that you can have a growth mindset in some areas of your life, but not necessarily others. Okay, and I'll have to say that, you know, some of things I can definitely say that I have a growth mindset, and I will catch myself, often with statistical programs, with a fixed mindset going, oh, I'm not going to be able to figure this out. That's not true. I have to stop myself consciously and say, that's not true. If you work hard enough, you can figure this out. All right, so this was an intervention that we conducted with kindergartners. Sorry for you high school people. We are moving. Our next intervention will actually be in middle school, 6th through 8th grade, and we'll be working in inference making and mindset, hopefully this fall. If not, it will be in the spring that we'll conduct the study. We're writing that proposal up now. But this one was with kindergartners. And what we did, this was my doctoral student, Katie Schroet. What we did is we took writer's workshop. If you guys, how many people are elementary people? Oh, good. Okay. So took writer's workshop, and we said, well, what's missing out of writer's workshop for kids who are at risk of developing reading difficulties or writing difficulties? We said, well, a lot of that we think is self-regulation. So we looked at Steve Graham's work, and then we embedded his work within this. We had mindset instruction added to that. So we took children's literature of one was how malleable the brain was, but then the other stories were kids overcoming difficult situations. And then we also had these Ziggy and Nash stories, which I'll talk about. We had self-regulation strategies, so they had word walls. They had self-taught checklists because the kids were taught to go to their checklist first before asking a peer, before asking the teacher, because we wanted them to become we wanted them to become self-efficacious. We wanted them to say, this is my learning and I can figure it out if I need to. So we wanted to develop that very early on. And then we had these self-editing checklists. So a number of checklists the kids could go through, even without being readers. They were visual, that they could go through and say, oh, I have this problem, so I just need to go to this checklist. If I have this problem, I go to this one. And then if they still couldn't figure it out, they'd ask a peer who would also say, did you look at your checklist first? And then they would go to the teacher if needed. So this was the book that we used that they would read from. So we only spent about 10 minutes, every 10 to 15 minutes every day reading the book, the particular book of the day. But this was the really important one because it really talked about when you try hard to learn something, you make new connections and your brain keeps stretching. And that's what makes you smarter. Okay, so the kids were told this is what makes you smarter. They were also told, love mistakes. Mistakes are the best thing that happened to you because that means you're going to have real learning happening. So we got them excited about making mistakes. And then they would stretch their hands. So we had these movements that went with it to remind them. So here's one of the examples of a self-regulation checklist where the kids stretch their words, say it slowly, listen to the sound you hear, keep saying the words slowly, write down the letters. So these are the steps that they could take. Here are some other ones. We really got them to incorporate this language into, into what they were saying in class, into what they're thinking. So I can do it. A mistake? Great. Mistakes help me learn better. I'll train my brain and I'll keep trying. I'll use my strategies to help me. Bring it on. I like a challenge. This may take some time and effort, but it will be worth it. Okay, so we used that language a lot. We modeled that language, and this was a mixed method study, so they also took qualitative data of the kids, of what they were saying in class, and that in interviews. And it was really interesting because they were using this language. It was really interesting. We have one transcript that tells of a kid coming in and said, last night I broke my water bottle. The thing came off, and he says, my mom wanted to throw it away, but I said, no. I can fix it. I will keep trying until that water bottle's fixed. And I'm like, oh, that poor mother. That water bottle's probably not fixable. But they were incorporating this stuff, this language at home, which was, pretty cool. And here are some of the other, you see the editing checklists. What was something different that we did in this study is we created two characters. So Ziggy and Nash. Ziggy, and there are little puppets that went with these guys, and we had little storybooks that we made up. Ziggy has a growth mindset. Ziggy says, bring it on, I can do it. He likes challenges. He increases efforts when things become difficult. And Nash has a fixed mindset. Nash thinks he's smart. He's like, don't just give me easy things. I don't want any challenges. Things are fine. He likes to stick with those easy activities, and he quits when things get difficult. And what most of the literature here has done, and we wanted these exemplars for kids because a lot of the surveys I didn't think would make sense for kindergartners, but we said, okay, who are you most like? When this happens, who are you most like, Ziggy or Nash? And almost all of the kids told us that they were like Ziggy, okay? So they told us that they were like Ziggy, and we thought, well, I wonder, and here you see, this is the survey that we gave, and you can see at the beginning, even most of the kids here, they were telling us, okay, yeah, I still am, and you don't have the Ziggy and Nash piece, but they were both telling us, okay, this is actually at the end, this is our treatment, and this is our control. So these kids are way more like Ziggy, and these kids are stayed the same in our control, which is great results. Actually, we don't see that often where you just have the control flatline. Here's what was really interesting, I think, that we decided to add a task. Because, okay, you can say that you're more like Ziggy, but what do you actually do when I give you challenging tasks? So we developed 10 challenging writing tasks, okay, each one increasing in difficulty. And what we would say is, here's a challenging writing task. And they would do that test and say, would you like another challenging writing task? And no matter how they did on the task, that was not what we were looking for. We were looking to see, did they ask for another challenging task? So at the beginning, the kids took an almost average of 3, 2.5 to 3 challenging tasks, and then they said, no, I'm done. Like, no, I've had enough. Because those are really hard, right? I might tell you I'm like Ziggy, but actually that's hard. I don't want to keep going. At the end of treatment, the treatment group took on an average of almost 8 tasks, and the control group was still a flat line at almost 3. Okay, so we believe that we actually changed their perseverance, right? Their ability to take a new challenging task and ask for that task. So we felt like we had done at least this part right. And I will tell you that because I had been told so many times by advisors, hey, you don't want to study in this area, it's really difficult, I don't think you're going to get real effects, it's a real nebulous area, maybe you shouldn't do that. So I'd heard this over the years. So when my student Katie, and we both read Mindset at the same time, and I'm like, oh, you read that too? Yeah. And I'm like, I'd love to do something. She goes, I would love to do something on that. And I'm like, and I'm like, well, maybe we need to ask some other questions. And she's like, no, we really need to do this. And I'm like, okay. I really thought we weren't going to see gains. I thought maybe we'd see gains here, but I didn't think we were going to see academic gains due to this. And then I was shocked. Because this is a standardized writing measure for kindergartners. And what you see here, and this one is this one is the base 0.72. This one is basic writing, this one is conceptual writing. So on this one, remember the effect sizes, where would I be dancing at 0.72? In the street. And that's just the basic writing. Look at this one. This is conceptual writing for kindergartners. For the treatment group, I have a 1.77. Remember I told you, make sure they didn't cook the data? You just seen how many times I went through this data. Because I'm like, no one, and we've actually had a journal, the reviewer come back and say, I really can't believe this. And I'm like, I still can't believe it. So we get this huge effect on your conceptual writing. And this is a 6-week program. Okay, so that shouldn't happen in 6 weeks. What we believe it's due to is the biggest difference in between treatment and control really was not just the self-regulation checklist, because you got to have strategies there, but this mindset training as well. Here you have, for the writing rubrics, you also see a difference. When we looked at their qualitative writing, we see this big difference. This is a more near measure, so that 2.89 looks crazy, but it's a real near measure of what we were teaching. So here are some pre-interview data. It's hard to get the words right. Mistakes make me embarrassed. I just like to write easy words. I don't really think I can do it. The hardest thing about writing is being smart. Okay, so they already come in with these beliefs that you either have it or you don't. And mind you, you play that out your whole life because you believe that it's fixed. In first grade, I will be a good writer. I only write if my mom tells me to. I need my mom's help, okay? Post-interview data exemplars from the experimental group. Mistakes are good because they help your brain not do it again next time. I use my word wall. Use your imagination. You can't give up. Concentrate and practice. I'm good at writing lots of hard words. I like to write about stuff I really like I know what I'm going to write about. I don't need help. Okay? Here are some examples when you see for spelling what some of the kids were doing. There's one of the post examples from the journal. Here is one of the idea charts. So that up there helps them to know if they can't come up with an idea for their daily journal, they would go to their chart to look for ideas. And then strategies for writing ideas. There's another one that they could use. And there's the editing. Here's an example of a child over time. So this is his first, remember we have 6 weeks. This is within 6 weeks. So this is the first sample that we got from Leo. And this is a snake on a bridge there, and he has Brig, which is great actually for a beginning kindergartner. This is terrific. And here we see what the teacher's written to think about how to develop the student better or what they should work on. Here's sample 2. So this is about a week and a half later. We start to see sentences starting to form a little bit better there. Here you see, and this is a farting tree, just to let you know. We had some very interesting examples came out of the journals. But here you start to see, adding some things. I will say that this was a kid, and that was in the upper part of our sample. So I have to tell you that first. This one, I have some average examples too. This is one that really made a lot of progress, but I think that I love the farting tree too. I like to have that in here too. And he says, I want to write bigger stories. So like that's his goal now. I just want to make them longer and better. So we had kids go from the 47th percentile on average to the 86th percentile in basic writing. For the control group, they still got better. They went from the 50th percentile to 70th. So just giving them writing instruction and doing writer's workshop alone helped. That was good. But you see in contextual writing, that experimental group going from the 1st percentile to the 45th percentile. Okay, so you see major differences between the treatment and control here. And they were able to talk more about their strengths and weaknesses of their writing. They were able to look critically at their own writing more so than the control group. So that was the writing study. There are a few other things. If I have time, I do have time. Ooh, I've been trying to talk quickly. Sorry about that. But sometimes I don't get through everything. So this is good. So there are other things I think we need to think about when we're talking about, putting together good reading instruction for kids. And one of those things is selecting the right text. It's got to be slightly harder than where the kid is, but not too much. And how do you get them to work through that? So we're going to kind of shift gears and talk about that. And then we'll come back to some more practical tips that have been shown in the literature for increasing motivation with kids. So we know that there's this text complexity gap, which I've already talked about, that 50% of the kids graduating from high school are ready for a freshman level college. And we know that the performance on complex text, so when they take the passages and they look at, okay, why are people doing well on the ACT and why aren't they? One of the features that comes out is the complexity of the text. So the more complex text there are kids who do really well on that and many kids who bomb that. And that seems to be the distinguishing factor of how well you do in college. Who's working through that more complex text, who's able to do that, is going to do better in college than who doesn't. There's this 2-year gap, like I talked about. We're 2 years behind. So they're at 12th grade, but they're actually reading at a 10th grade level. That's problematic. There also is some argument that text complexity over the years has gone down, that our use of vocabulary, our complex sentence structure has been reduced over time. And that's part of the reason they have struggled with these complex sentence structures on these tests. We know Common Core has made this part of their standards because they think it is that important that we increase this text complexity. However, we must keep in mind that kids who are struggling, you can't just raise the bar and expect, oh, now magically everything's going to be fine. They weren't doing fine when the bar was down here. How do we expect them to jump higher? That's problematic. So I'd like you to take, about 4 minutes, and I'd like you to tell me, how complex are these texts? So rank them from least, or easiest to hardest. Okay, so with your group, easiest, usually you need a group because not everyone knows all of the text. You guys might though, you have so many elementary people, you may. So I want you to rank them easiest to hardest in your group. Take about 5 minutes. Okay, so any surprises here?
So I'm thinking of comparing this to dictionaries. Dictionaries don't prescribe, they just describe how the language is used. So according to who is it a third and fourth grade level? I mean, it should be a 3rd and 4th grade level, grapes of wrath, or...
Okay, so that you look at that and you go, grapes of wrath. I can guarantee that if you send grapes of wrath home with the kids in 3rd and 4th grade, you are going to get some phone calls. And you probably will lose your job. That is totally inappropriate for 3rd and 4th grade. So why is that? That's exactly, why is that?
It's about the syntax, the mechanics.
Okay, what do we know about Steinbeck's writing?
It's straightforward and simple.
It is. Actually, the ideas are extremely complex, but the text, his sentences are short, and he doesn't use many rare words. Okay? So that's why Steinbeck ends up in 3rd and 4th grade. Okay? So you go, oh, maybe I need to look at those lexile. So you really do, as a teacher, need to read what students are reading so that you have a sense of, because what isn't captured by lexile? The content, the background, right? The background knowledge, you need to understand it. The content, whether it's appropriate or not, is not captured. Okay? So that's problematic. Anything else that surprised you? Okay, how many people have read Ender's Game? Ender's Game is it's one of my favorite books. It's really, the concepts in this are deep, right? But it's science fiction, and science fiction is typically written in shorter sentences, okay? If you read Asimov, those sentences are extremely short. The ideas, though, are very complex. Marcus Zusak is another one of my favorite writers, and his work, if you read it, is mostly figurative language. But he uses normal words like chocolate, or how do you hear a smell? So he'll say things like that. Those are all words that are not rare, but they're used in a way that doesn't make any sense. Also, death is the narrator here, and you have to infer that. Okay, so there's all these things going on that you have to, background knowledge and figurative language that you have to figure out from Zusak, yet this is not captured here. Okay, so that stuff needs to be taken into account when we're talking about text complexity. So here's what the text complexity measures are actually capturing. So for Flesch-Kincaid, word length and sentence length. Dale Chaw, word frequency in the language and sentence length. Lexau's is word frequency and sentence length. They're using different logarithms, though, than the first two. That's how that one is different. Atos, which is AR, is word difficulty, word length, sentence length, and text length. Cometrics is where researchers are moving, because it's actually trying to capture narrativity, referential cohesion, how do the sentences go together? That seems to make sense for comprehension. Syntactic simplicity, word concreteness, and deep cohesion. How do all the paragraphs fit together? How well written is it? So it's able to capture these now. They have a way of capturing this through a lot of, like, Watson and the AI systems that have been going on. They're able to now capture things that we could never capture before. It has not moved into the education realm just because it's not a commercial enterprise. It's a research enterprise, unfortunately, but that may change. Actually, Pearson has picked up this reading maturity metric, which actually combines what Lexau's is doing and what Cometrics is doing. So we may start to get a better, a better read on these text complexity measures now that Pearson has actually started this one. We still can't get to background knowledge here, though. LSA, we have something called latent semantic analysis, which is part of that AI system that we can look at how language develops, but it's not quite there enough to tell us what the kid knows and should know, and what we're getting there, though we are getting there. So until then, we have these advantages of these measures, which they're obviously objective, computer generated, and we can increase difficulty pretty easily over time if we use them. However, content and knowledge aren't considered. Complex ideas may be present without complex syntax or vocabulary. They limit students' choice. If a student has expertise in an area, they can read above their grade level in that area. If they have little background, they probably need to read actually below that text complexity. Standards may be too difficult, like I've talked about repeatedly, for those struggling readers. So we can't take teachers out of the equation. Like, you got to be reading what your students are reading, and there's just no way to get around that. I do like how Common Core has talked about the ways to think about selecting text, because quantitative measures, that readability, is only 1/3 of what you think about. The other pieces are really qualitative, this levels of meaning. What is a student actually going to take away from this to help their lives? Like, how does it add meaning that will stay with them and value that will stay with them? That's important. Structure, are they experiencing different text structures over time? Language, are they developing good vocabulary and language? Figurative language. And then knowledge, how are they developing knowledge over time? What does that do for that? Thinking about the reader and task, is it going to be motivating for students? Does it help build their knowledge? Do they have knowledge enough to understand it? Purpose of what you're doing with that book, and the complexity of the task you're asking them to do. Because think about, writing a paper is very different than answering multiple choice questions, right? And that needs to be determined when you're selecting text. I think about these when I'm selecting text for an intervention. Vocabulary, interest, the readability, text cohesion, layers of meaning, sociocultural aspects, making sure that everyone's represented in some way in the variety of texts that we choose. And then that knowledge development is really important. I choose books often, even if I'm doing a decoding intervention, I'm still choosing books around a theme as well as the decoding piece, because I want them to build knowledge. It's very important that they build knowledge very early on over time. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I don't know if you guys are aware of the Find a Book feature in Lexile. Please go there, because you can go through and pick, I like dogs and I like magic, and I have a Lexile, or I read at about a 3rd grade level, and it will shoot back to you all the books on dogs and magic at that grade level. And then you can go order it through, you can look to see if your library has it, but you can also order it online. So that's a very nice feature for kids to be able to choose things they like and at their level. Another great source, how many people use News ELA? Okay, just a few of you. Please go to News ELA. So this will allow you to do, for instance, there's some great articles. So they take things from Scientific American, from Time, from all of these different places, and then they take the text complexity and they give you often 5 levels of text complexity. So you can work with your students, and they're all working on the same, they're working on rockets or they're working on planets. They all can be working on the same article, yet at their decoding level. It also gives you 10 questions and a writing prompt, all for free. All you have to do is sign up. They have also great, if you go to the section that has the themed pieces, they'll have like a whole section on articles about dogs, or all these different themed articles, which are great, and you can get them at the Lexile level that you need them. Scholastic does this, but it's not free. Here's just award winners. Always think about, if you're looking at independent reading, don't just go on what teachers have said or what Newberry has said or Caldecott, because I like the kids.com, because kids know what kids like. And for independent reading, they should have fun with that. So also look at kid-awarded books. This is a teen book finder, and that might be, they like technology. Maybe this is the way to go, get them engaged. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of those practical tips. Interest, motivation, engagement. I told you earlier that attitudes worsen over time, unfortunately, so you got to get better as a middle school. I love middle school. I like actually most ages, but middle school is so much fun because they're little and they're big at the same time. But this is where we start to see that decline. We know that those attitudes worsen more rapidly for poor readers. Girls possess more positive reading attitudes. Instructional methods can positively influence attitudes. So having effective instruction that's the other thing I did want to talk to you guys about, is that interest, we've all believed that we all have an interest, and then if you have kids work in their interest, then that's the best way to go, right? You find out what a kid likes, and I advocate that, certainly. However, we also know from the research that just learning about something in depth makes you more interested in that. So it's the other way around. As you get better at something and you develop expertise in an area, guess what? You start to enjoy reading more about that thing. So keeping kids just with what they like isn't necessarily what you need to do. What you need to do is develop an interest, or have the kids develop an interest, learn all about that thing, and then they'll be more interested in it. And it's a cycle. With my own kids, I have this thing, and they'll tell you they don't like it, but they do. In the summer, they have to do a research project. So every summer, they have to pick a subject. When they were little, they picked things like cats and dogs. And, as they got older, my oldest daughter would pick strange things that I shouldn't even tell people probably. But things like, one year she studied cults and something else. And I'm like, okay. But she started to look at this, why do people form groups? And then why do they fall into this? And then the next year she looked at sociopaths. I'm like, maybe I should worry about my child at this point, right? But what she really was studying was, how is empathy developed and why does it not develop in certain people? So she did this whole, study about, or they have to come up with some presentation they give at the end of the summer. And she actually talked about, how empathy doesn't develop for certain people and the measures that are used to capture that. But, then she was looking at, well, what kinds of things can you do early on and interventions can you do early on to make sure that kids do develop that empathy? Are there things out there? And now she's getting ready. She still hasn't totally figured out her major, but she is at school and she's looking at developmental psychology and working with researchers who are working in studying empathy with toddlers. So it's like, but at first she wasn't really, it was like, I have to pick a topic. Mom's making me do this. And I have to go look at things, right? And pull things together. But once she did it, she became more and more interested every year about this. So I was like, oh, it really does work that way. So giving them some freedom and choice, but also really getting them to develop it around a theme that they become an expert in, that they'll become more interested in that topic as they go. So instructional methods, getting back to this, attitudes, instructional methods do positively influence attitudes. Ethnicity by itself is not strongly related to reading attitudes. Interests, number of interests decline by age. So we start to specify what we like, makes sense. Typical male, and I hate this one, typical male interests are science, machines, sports, and action adventure. My youngest daughter actually loves those things. She loved informational text, not narrative text. So it's not the case for all children, but in general. Typical female interests include interpersonal relationships. Interests across gender or ability include humor, animals, and the unusual. So if you want to pick something for a class to listen to or to work on as a group, those are good categories to select. These are the interest inventories that I give kids when I first meet them, because I do think getting kids interested in reading and loving reading is you've got to connect them to the right books. And I can only do that if I know somewhat what you like to do. I need to know you well to be able to select books for you. And I need to get you to understand yourself well enough to know when you go to the library what to pick, because kids don't know. They really do pick whatever the librarians put at the top on the top, because they don't know what they like. So getting them to develop their own, figure out, well, what am I interested in? And to start picking all the books about magic if that's what they're interested in, or all the books. And you notice the kids that are good readers do that stuff kind of naturally. It's the struggling readers that they really don't have a clue, but getting them to start thinking in the way of developing their own expertise and picking out books in a certain way, I think is really helpful. I also have interest checklists that I use. Okay. Again, you want this content to be meaningful and engaging. You guys know that. Let's see. You want to create that autonomy. Again, getting them to be interested and wanting to learn about things takes time. You've got to give them the structure to do that, and you've got to help them at first, but you've got to think about where do I want them to be at the end of the year. Let's see. Make them relevant to their interest, everyday life, important current events. That's why I like News ELA. It does that. Let's see. It's good, and you talked about this earlier, to have students set themselves, come up with a goal. Like for my research project with my kids, I make them tell me, what's the product that you want at the end of this? How are you going to show us what you've learned? What are your goals each week? They do have to do that. They hate that too. But at the end of the day, they do like it. You want them to be self-directed learners. Again, moving them towards that. And we looked at remember Hattie said that student-centered stuff, so don't go too overboard here, right? Like students still, especially struggling readers, really are going to need your help in this area. We want a balance between student-centered and teacher-centered for most kids. So increasing self-regulation and motivation. Be supportive, give specific praise. Not just general praise. Specific praise is actually the only way you can give good feedback about anything. Emphasize intrinsic motivation for reading. Provide choice whenever possible. Model a growth mindset. This is really difficult. So, and I don't know, I'm really good at, I talk to myself a lot, so I'm really good at, like, in front of the kids, messing up and telling them, and letting them see what I'm doing wrong. And I often will model mistakes for them. Like, I really didn't make a mistake. But I will pretend to make a mistake for them so they can see how I resolve that mistake, because otherwise they can't get in my head, right? I can tell them what I'm going to do, but to model it for them, oh, you know what? oh, that word, I must have said that word wrong. That can't be right in this context. That doesn't make any sense. So I will do that often, and the kids will hear me. Some teachers are not real comfortable with that. I will tell you that. Sometimes you have to work, if you're not a person that talks to yourself and isn't afraid to like throwing out all your mistakes for the world, you may have to work on that. But it's very important for kids to see first that you make mistakes, that you're okay with the mistakes you make, and that you fix them, but also see how the process works in comprehension. They can't change their mental process without seeing how someone else, an expert, works. They just can't. Just answering the questions is never going to get them there. They have to see how you were able to resolve the mistakes you're making. Provide interesting and challenging materials, promote self-efficacy, allow content expertise to develop. Avoid focusing on performance-oriented goals. Those are like, I want to get 100% on this, on the AR test. I want to make so many more words per minute, which you could go, maybe that one is a mastery. You want mastery goals, that I got better, I understood this better. Not I got an A on it, but I understood what I was doing here better. I did better at making more complicated sentences, and my editing, I use periods better. Not, you know what, she gave me an A on this and last time I got a B. Okay, that's it. Those are performance-oriented goals. Grade point, grades really shouldn't matter at the end of the day. They do, right? I want my kids to get A's and B's in their schoolwork. But I never talk about grades. And I say, I don't care about grades. All I care is, did you learn what you were supposed to learn? And that's where you want that orientation to be. Try to avoid that general praise, give specific praise. Don't praise the completion of easy tasks. Kids know that you are giving them praise where it really wasn't earned. They know that. Don't praise innate traits. I catch myself doing this all the time. Oh, you're really smart. You'll get this. No. You're a really hard worker. You're going to get this. You see the difference? Okay, one is I'm looking at their intelligence, which is they figure is a fixed piece, right? The other one is I'm talking about their behavior, which is more important. So saying you're smart is not, and actually a lot of research shows that when you tell a kid they're smart, they go into a fixed mindset. And they start to behave in that manner instead of into a growth mindset. So praise effort and their work and their behavior, not their innate, what we see as innate traits. Avoid being disorganized is one of the things in the literature. Avoid in literacy changing text topics repeatedly. Each day doing a different topic is not helpful for developing that knowledge over time, and it's very disconcerting for kids. Okay, so working through, and there are lots of texts like this. If you're doing fluency work and decoding work, I think it's fine to do that. But when you're working in comprehension, try to stick with text that's similar or goes on for a number of days so that kids can really get into something deeply.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is a week at a time?
I think that's good. It depends on the text and the theme. But more and more as I get older and I develop these interventions, we start looking at themes of 6 weeks because we really want to develop, some expertise and make the kids feel good. Hey, I know quite a bit about that. So we've been doing that more and more often. We don't have a lot of research about it. We have some about informational text. We don't have a lot of research about themes and how to do it well. Like which one comes first, informational text or the narrative text, if you're combining those? No one's ever asked the question. So I keep looking for doctoral students. If any of you are interested in a literacy program, we have one here, and a PhD program. That's a great question I would love to see answered. I think you guys know about those. So for older students, think about a wall of fame, recommendation or excerpts from students. They read a book, they put up their, what they thought, who they think would like the book. Book blogs, kids like to do these. Get them to write, instead of a book report, they're just writing for their peers about what was the book about and what did you really like and who do you think would like this book. Vote for the class read aloud. So read a few pages out of 3 or 4 books and then let them vote on which one they think you'd like to do as a read aloud. Book introduction, same thing. Read a book for a chapter or 2, especially with struggling readers, because that gives them enough time to get into the book but then set it aside. Anyone that would like to check this book out is welcome to. So always leave it at a hanger, and they're just like, oh, I got to know what happened, right? And that book will be out. It will circulate for a long time. You may want to have 2 or 3 copies ready. Read aloud, even for the older kids. This is really important to do as a group. If you're going to have kids read in class, for struggling readers, be real careful. Don't make them read in front of others. If you're in a small group and you need to give feedback, that's fine. But in the large group, let them read silently first. Also, let them work with a buddy and hear it first, and then they read it, so that so they don't feel bad about really struggling with reading. And then open mic, we use this in 7th grade if you have time. I get in today's testing world that this is not an option often, but every so often, have kids bring their own writing. Have them write a play. Have them present things. We would do this on Fridays, every other Friday. So kids who behaved and did all their work would get to come to open mic, and they would get up, and we had a microphone, and they'd have a chair, we'd dim the lights, we'd eat popcorn, and the kids would present their own work during the, or they could present an excerpt out of a book that they really liked. They loved this. So we were still doing literacy activities, but they were the center of that, and the kids liked that a lot. I think that today we're testing all sorts of skills, right? Every day you guys have to test, well, not every day, but often seems like that. And we have all of the standardized testing going on. But as we see, student expectations, this stuff is really important. Yet how many of you have measured motivation in your classroom? Right? So if we're going to develop readers over time, don't we need to know how we're impacting their motivation and their their perseverance in this? Seems like something we should have. So there are people working on that. We have some of these measures. A lot of them aren't reliable. That's why I was cautioned against this area. We have hope, though, that in Kansas, they've gotten a grant to actually work on this, because I believe that this is as important to measure over time as anything else that we measure, because this could have impact on kids' lives, their whole life. If we develop lifelong readers, that's going to make a huge difference in people's lives. So hopefully we'll get to this point, but before they ask kids, were you interested in this? Did you become more interested in this topic after? Like, asking those questions is important to get a feel for, are you making a difference in their motivation, in their perseverance, in their engagement? All right, so I don't have time for the next little bit, and I didn't know, but anytime I'm in front of educators, I do have to talk about 3 things that I think are really, really important because you can believe I can do it, but if you don't have the strategies or the effective instruction to do it, it doesn't matter how much you feel like you can do it, you can't do it, right? So there are 3 areas that I think need to be covered, and I'll just skim through this really quickly, and then I will take questions. But there are 3 areas. Vocabulary, build that every day and over time. Knowledge, extremely important. It's what we're probably missing and why we have trouble making scores in 8th grade worldwide. We do really well at 4th grade. We don't do so well on the international tests at 8th grade. Or at 12th grade, we go down. And the reason I believe is because we've really taken and done reading, like reading classes make up most of our day in elementary school. We're not really developing knowledge over time. So in those reading classes, teach information that matters, because over time it's going to matter by 12th grade, because your background knowledge is probably one of the most important pieces of understanding text later on than any other piece that we have. So we need to develop that over time. And then strategy instruction, still very important, in particularly inference generation. Kids need to know how to make inferences. So you can read these if you ask for well, let's do it real quick. At this point in the talk, you probably need something funny. Good old Calvin. So we did a meta, you guys could look at this, but look how important it is for kids with reading difficulties to teach vocabulary. That's how it impacts comprehension. It's huge. You must teach vocabulary to kids who struggle with reading for them to comprehend what they're reading. Knowledge, really important. We know that actually studies have shown that people who have deeper knowledge in an area will do better than people who have higher IQs. Okay, so if you have more knowledge of a topic, you are better, even if you are a better reader or you have a higher IQ. So again, knowledge winning the day here. There's a great YouTube video by Daniel Willingham about the knowledge and the knowledge deficit we've probably created in classrooms. I highly suggest that. And you can see here, this is the amount of time spent in language arts class, K through 3 and 4 through 6. And you can see what's not happening. Science and social studies. Mind you, I'm a literacy person. I want all this time, but I also know that if I'm only teaching things like narrative, and I'm not teaching in a themed approach where I'm developing knowledge, that's going to bite us later on. Okay, so we've taken that out, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're not doing so well in those older grades for comprehension. So teach things that matter, you know, things that kids enjoy. I still want to teach narrative, that's my favorite anyway, but I've got to also include those other pieces, that informational text. That's why I like a themed approach. Keeping in mind, knowledge is not the only thing. We know inference matters. If you guys can make the visual inference there. Actually, there's been a number of studies that have used comic strips and jokes to actually teach kids how to make inferences, because all of them require you to make inferences. They all require you to take your background knowledge, integrate it with what you see, and come up with what the author's trying to tell you. And it's a great way to teach kids to do that. So including those in your day, fun for the kids, fun for you, can be helpful. There was another meta-analysis. It's important. Okay, so now we get to the wrap-up. Your growth mindset action plan. Name at least 2 things that you could implement to improve self-regulation, persistence, and engagement with your students. So I want you to think just for about a minute. Write those down. Have an action plan. So when you go in on Monday, what are the 2 things that you are going to do that you've learned today that's going to help your kids? So 2 things, write those down real quick. We'll take a minute and then I can answer questions. I'd love to talk. Typically, I'd have you guys talk to me about, if you'd like to stay, I'd love to hear what you're planning on doing. But I just wanted to share with you these additional resources here that I think are useful for teachers. And again, I want to plug my program because I'm always looking for great students to come and work with me.